Hey everyone, this is Nick. In this video I'm going to test out the inlay kit from Cutting It Close. To be honest, I hadn't even heard of anyone producing a dedicated inlay kit like this until a couple of my students asked me if I could recommend it. After watching a few YouTube videos and checking out the company's website, I decided to place an order. Just in case I didn't order it from my business email, I didn't want to risk them sending me their best version if they happen to know who I was. Though, to be fair, I have no idea if they've ever even heard of me. Anyway, the order's in and the package has already arrived. I decided to test it using the most classic combination I typically work with, a walnut board with maple and cherry inlays. Unfortunately, they were out of yellow heart, which I was really hoping to get, so I went with Padak instead, just to have a backup. I also grabbed a couple of pieces of maple and sycamore just to experiment a bit. I've never worked with sycamore before, so I thought it'd be cool to try something new with it. First impressions are good. I was pleasantly surprised to see that each blank was individually sealed in shrink wrap. I carefully inspected each piece for defects or any visible flaws in the wood, which is pretty standard practice, and didn't find anything critical. Everything looked well within reason. The next thing I did was check the dimensions and the corners. In my case, the walnut board was slightly smaller than 18 by 12 inches, while the others were just a bit oversized. One of the corners on the walnut board was slightly out of square. But that's not an issue for me. I understand these are just blanks. So next, I need to pick a design for the test. It shouldn't be too simple, but not overly complex either, something in the middle, so I can work on it in between orders. Now I just have to decide what exactly I want to make. After scrolling through some of my designs, I picked a couple that I'd really like to make, but I just haven't gotten around to them yet. I just have to keep in mind that some of the designs were made for 19 by 12 inch boards. I've been wanting to make this deer design for a while now, and in my case I don't even need to scale it down. I can just use the central part of the layout. I've also been wanting to make this board for a long time, and most likely I won't even need to adjust the design size at all. But still, I'm going to keep scrolling. This one would fit the size perfectly, but I'm just not feeling inspired to make it right now. After a bit of back and forth, I decided to go with this theme design. Since the inlay kit came from Texas, I thought it'd make sense to use something in the same spirit. I just need to check if I can scale it down to fit the new board dimensions. After a bit of measuring and resizing, I adjusted the design to fit the board. And since I wasn't able to get any yellow heart, I am going to swap the yellow inlays for cherry. Of course, I could have made the entire inlay out of maple. That would have looked good too. Or I could have gone with Padak, but I usually avoid using Padak on walnut. Once you apply the finish, there's barely any contrast left. So I'm sticking with the original plan, maple and cherry. In my opinion, that still looks great. Before I start milling, I'm giving the board one more check for any defects. By the way, I think it's already been sanded to 180 grit, which honestly is kind of crazy, but in a good way considering this is just a blank for inlay work. After picking the side with the fewest flaws, I decided to check the board's thickness at all four corners, just to see if it needs to be surfaced before I start. The variation in thickness between the corners was within 0.2 millimeters, which I think is more than acceptable to go straight into milling. No additional surfacing is needed. I'm going to start by trimming the blank down to the final dimensions. After that, I'll go straight into milling the pocket for the maple inlay. Before milling the maple, I'm double checking the thickness of the blank. The listed thickness is supposed to be 0.6 inches, which is about 15 millimeters, but in reality the maple blank measures almost 18 millimeters, that's around 0.7 inches. It's not a bad thing, but in my opinion it's a bit of a waste of material. I usually make my inlay blanks just under 0.5 inches thick. From there, everything goes as usual. I carefully clean the inlays from any leftover chips and trim the tips. After a dry fit to make sure everything lines up properly, I move on to gluing the inlays in. About 8 hours later, once the board has dried, I trim off the top layer of the inlays. Before milling the next pocket for the cherry inlay, I let the board rest for about a day so it could settle and flatten back out. I also measured the cherry blank for thickness and checked all 4 corners. The thickness was pretty consistent across the board, and overall it was slightly thicker than what was listed. After gluing it in, I wait about 8 hours and then trim off the excess. Then I let the board sit for another full day until it levels out again. Even though this was just a test project, I put just as much time and effort into it as I would for a regular order. And since it wasn't a commission piece, I thought it'd be a fun idea to send it back to Texas to the owner of the company. And here's my final take. I'll start with the downsides. I wouldn't say I didn't like the kit, it just doesn't quite match my specific needs. First, the size. I usually make my boards 19 by 12 inches, and these are 12 by 18, which throws things off a bit for me. Second, even though all the boards were free of defects, the walnut board had a few lighter colored patches. That's not necessarily a bad thing, it just doesn't match my personal taste. And lastly, the thickness of the inlay blanks. I'd personally prefer them a bit thinner, around 0.5 inches. Now for the positives. I was honestly surprised by the quality. I expected a rougher finish, especially since this kit is meant to be processed and sanded further anyway. But in reality, the boards are already in great shape. You could almost use them as cutting boards right out of the box, just add some oil. This kit is also a great option for anyone who doesn't want to or simply can't glue up their own blanks. It definitely saves time. The quality of the wood itself is excellent, even though I had a few comments about the walnut board. Overall, it's really solid. All in all, I'm seriously considering ordering a custom batch, just in a larger size. I've already reached out to Ryan and we've started discussing the possibility of making that happen. And yep, I've already sent him the board as well. If you've made it to the end of the video, drop a comment and let me know what you think the ideal board size is. Also, if you've used kits like this before, I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if not, let me know what you think about this kind of kit in general. I tried to show the entire process as clearly as possible with plenty of close-up shots. And I almost forgot to say I'm absolutely happy with how the board turned out. The inlay, as always, fits perfectly with no glue gaps. Thanks so much for watching, for the likes, and for leaving a comment under the video.